Hello, today I'm going to teach you something really useful, and that is how to prepare a session to send it off to a mixer. Now, being a mixer myself for many years, I get asked this question all the time. Hey, what's the best way to send you files? So there's a lot of things to talk about philosophically here today, and there's some great best practices. While there's no exact method how to do this, because of course, every session and producer's workflow is totally different. Like I said, there are guidelines that you can use, and this is a very important topic because I will tell you, you do not want to be the producer that sends in a totally unorganized mess. You're going to get the mixer all riled up. Send in something really clean and great, and the mixer will praise you and probably send you and refer you more work. So let's head over to the DAW and take a look at a session. All right, in front of me here, we have a session that's got some drums, that's got some guitars and some bass and some vocals and some groups and some virtual instruments and all kinds of fun stuff. I'm gonna play here for 10 seconds. So we need to send this off to a mixer, okay? Well, obviously, the first question is, well, maybe they're in the same DAW that I am, so why don't I just send them my Cubase session? Okay, I think unless you have a very long-standing rapport with a mixer, meaning you've probably done like, say, 10 to 20 songs with them, and you really know them, that's a bad idea. Because the answer is, every time I've ever gotten a session from somebody else where I'm like, oh, you're a Cubase user, I'm a Cubase user, guess what? They always have some weird jank-ass setting. Like, for example, I like to go hit play and have my cursor return to starting position when I hit stop. Some people just hit play and it stops as it goes, which drives me nuts. So I now have to go dig through a bunch of menus I haven't looked at in 5 years for a preset that I set up and checked once and saved, and I have to find that and I have to uncheck that. Now that they may sound like not a big deal, but when you take all these little time-consuming tasks of having, like, you know, all these little anomalies in people's sessions and different ways people organize things, like, it's not necessarily going to work. So never assume that the person mixing your song has the same setup as you, even if they're using the same DAW. It is much better to print multi-track stems, okay? And this is even more important because some mixers mix in the box, some mix hybrid, and some mix on consoles. And guess what? Each one of those setups requires a totally different workflow. So if you just give somebody your disorganized, unedited session with all your edits in it and all these files and stuff, look, that's really bad prep. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's really important is to talk about organization of the session, okay? So you want to organize and name your files as intelligently and as cleanly as possible, so everybody can understand what everything is. So if we look at this session here, what do we got here? Well, you can see I have this thing called Shit Shaker. So let's take a listen to it. Now, somebody may not know what that is, so it's probably smarter to come in and just call this Shaker. Okay, K, what is K? All right, well, I see MIDI, so this is probably a sample. Oh, that's a kick sample. So let's call it kick sample. And just going through all of your files, can't spell, and marking what everything is. Okay, snare top, snare bottom, hi-hat, cymbals, left, right, overheads, rooms, rack tom, floor. Okay, probably want to call this floor 2. And very clean and simple names that make a lot of sense. Rhythm guitar, rhythm distortion guitar left, right, rhythm 2, chorus lead channel, rhythm C, rhythm C2, rhythm C3. Okay, C is center, rhythm clean 1, rhythm clean 2, rhythm. Okay, so now what's cool here is you might not notice this, but there are some files in here that I have that are mono. So for example, these overheads. But I want the mixer to have a stereo pair. So what I've done is I've grouped them. Just like I've already pre-bound some of the stereo guitars down in this song into a stereo pair. I would recommend the less amount of files that you give somebody, the easier the organization it is on their end and the less to look at. So what I'm gonna do when I export this is I'm gonna just take this group, I'm gonna call this cymbals, and I'm gonna call this room mics. And what I'm gonna do, so I don't export this file and double, is I'm just gonna delete the name on these. So when I go to the export window, I don't see them. And now I will export a stereo file with the balance of these. And I will go and make sure everything is zeroed out. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I've got everything pre-panned and stuff, and I'm giving the mixer exactly how I want it to be. So here's the overhead spread. I want them panned 100%, right? Here's a stereo file. Your job as a producer, and by the way, I have a great video on what is a mixer versus a producer on my YouTube here. You should definitely check out. But a great producer commits everything and makes all of the decisions so the mixer can just fly up the tracks and start working on taking the emotional translation out of the song and making the song push and pull the right way through the speakers, create the correct emotional energy for the listener to listen to, and give the desired emotional connection and reaction that the listener needs to have with the song itself. That's the mixer's job. The mixer's job is not, it's to sit there and figure out how to subgroup things, or like, oh, should this effect go on this guitar or whatever. So you should get in the habit of when you've got a cool effect, you should print it down. So for example, we got this crazy guitar here. Now, I don't want the mixer to sit down and try to figure out how to make that. Like, here's your DI guitar, you know? That's not the mixer's job. What's much better is to take this and commit this. So for example, you could take a thing, Cubase, I have it macroed, I could just bounce it down, boom. Or certain things, like for example, I could take my overheads, my symbols, and I could just go to file, sorry, they don't do render in place. I'll get it on export, but you can do things like, for example, if you have edits, you could bounce these down. You can what's called render in place, any like virtual instruments or anything like that into an audio file, or like your triggers. Yeah, here we go. We do render in place here. So we can go file, render in place, boom. It's gonna go run through the whole chain. So let's say I have a 6-sample snare stack that I'm in love with as a producer, and I wanna give that to the mixer, boom. There it is. So let's do the same thing with the kick. So render all your stuff, make your decisions, right? Label it correctly. And of course, we can give the mixer the MIDI as well as the audio information. So now I'm committing. I'm like, here's the kick and snare sample to go with the drums. This is it. This is what I want as a producer. Mix that. Okay, cool. All right, let's hear it. Cool. All right, so we've got all that stuff. It's super clean. So we just go through this whole session. We consolidate things. Like for example, I'm gonna pre-strip silence all these toms. I've got them set up. An important thing to notice when you're making cuts, and every DAW is different, but you wanna crossfade in and out. Now you notice I didn't do that, but what Cubase does have is something here in projects called auto fades. You can do one MS in and one MS out. So every time you cut a block and slide it, it makes a little 1 MS fade, so there's no pops and clicks. So I would rather give the mixer my pre-strip silence toms, because again, as a producer, I'm making a decision. So I would just export it like this with everything cut onto a single track. So we're gonna do that. Moving down, everything is named clean. You can see everything is committed, right? We're merging any regions or cuts, making sure everything makes sense. We have a bass DI, a bass dirty. Let's hear that. Okay, we have a bass fizz, and a bass rumble. Okay, so we've got 4 different basses, everything labeled clearly. Now let's go to the vocals. Now, I've got these grouped here from recording. You know, as a result, what's gonna happen is this is kind of a mess, right? So this is probably what your session might look like. You've got some kind of vocal playback where everything's are kind of like pre-mixed. So what you can do is, first, like I said, label everything. So let's just say Voc, chorus vocals main, right? And you can just go through and every single track label what it is. So is a vocal a main? Is it a double? Is it a verse? It is a chorus. Is it a bridge, right? Bridge main, chorus main, verse main. If there's different vocalists, it's important to name them, I think sometimes by name. So for example, you might have Steve, Todd, Jim, and Kelly. You know, you may not be able to tell Todd and Jim because when they sing in the same register, they have similar voices and they're singing at the same time. So that's confusing for the mixer if it's just vocal 1, 2, 3, 4. It's much easier to be like Todd, main vocal verse, Jim, Kelly, you know. So I recommend naming things as logically as possible so it's very easy for the mixer to follow along, you know, because you don't want to send them some mess of group channels like this. It's just an absolute disaster. The next thing here is virtual instruments. Now, I've got these frozen in this track. These you would just render in place, or, you know, when we go and export these, it's going to make sense. So again, you want to just go and label everything so we can say, okay, we got a piano. What's this? All right, we'll call this lead synth because lead is confusing, right? What do we got here at the end? Let's take a look at this. All right, we'll call that synth pad, and then we have another pad here. We'll call that string pad, okay? And then piano swell. And then we have our effect sends. So let's go like this and clean this up. Now, there's a couple of things we can talk about in terms of naming and organization that are important. But before we do that, let's talk about, it's very wise to print your effects. I just did a video on inside a multi-platinum producer session, and you can see how he exports everything. And all of his special vocal effects are committed, right? So, when you're recording, you might have some kind of vocal template for you to listen to and everything kind of like pre-mixed a little bit. If you want to put compression or a little bit of EQ and stuff on your vocal as a producer, absolutely do it. You can send a dry version and a wet version to the mixer, or you could take like all of your vocals like this, for example, and you could do a bounce of those and send them like a vocal reference and then give them the dry and the wet, so they have the option as, the mixer to be able to go in and to be able to sit down and pick through all that stuff. So it's important to print all that stuff, and I'll show you how to do this here in a second and clean this session up. But let's zoom out a little bit onto the macro level real quick. So in terms of naming and organization, there's like two ways I think you can do it. Okay, the first way that you can organize when you export, which is the way that I generally recommend, I think this is a little bit cleaner, is just to have everything in folders. So this is something I got here from Kevin Thrasher for a song that we're mixing from an artist called Gunner. And what's cool is Kevin has given me his reference mix. So he basically did his version of a mix, sent it to the artist, got the artist, the label, the management, etc., to sign off on it and said, cool, let's send this to the mixer. And they're all like, awesome, the song is sounding great. All the production is agreed on. The purpose of the reference mix is so that the label, the artist, the management can agree on the production and say, yeah, we love the song, we love the hook, we love everything about this. Now send it off to the mixer, we're good. We're not going to add anything. We're not going to take anything out. We're not going to, We're not going to basically reproduce the song on the poor mixer after it's been mixed. So we have this approved reference mix from the producer, and we can give this to the mixer, and the mixer can listen to this and reference this and be like, okay, this is how loud they want these synths balanced, right? So just give your best version of the mix. Very, 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 very important, and all great producers do this. And great mixers don't usually reinvent the wheel. They kind of usually try to take the reference and just make it better, big it up, and mix it. The reference is in here, which is fantastic. Next, he's got everything broken into folders and named well. So vocals, boom. Come on, computer, you can do it. Here we go. All right, so I've got this because of Mac versus PC, but you can see chorus, harm, add, etc. Everything is labeled. I can very clearly see what everything is. Here's the bass folder. We've got a P bass, drums, hi-hat, kick in, tom, snare bottom, snare trigger, sub kick, tom 1, tom 2, right? So it's very clear for me to look at this and know what I'm looking at. Okay, effects. So here we have all the effects. You can see everything is labeled very clearly. The guitars, the keys, the percussion, the subs, right? So I know what everything is as I'm dropping this into the session here. My assistant can prep this for me on the mix side and we're good to go. So this is one way to do it. Another way to do it is if you want to just drop all the files like in order. So for example, if I just do shaker, it's going to get confusing. Even though you can come into Cubase file export here and like change the numbering algorithm and like how you're going to name things. And if you want to put orders, all that stuff is in here. But you could just go like, for example, you could be like D for drum and go through and be like D, right? And just rip through everything like this. And then it's like you have all your drums. Then you have, your B for bass, G for guitar, P for production, or, K for keys, whatever. V for vocal. So you could do it like that as well. Either way, just do something that makes sense. I like folders. I think folders are really clean and clear. It's very easy to drag and drop and then be like, hey, we're missing something. And then the producer can be like, oh, did you not see keys ARP 12 in the synths folder? And you could be like, nah, there was only this and that. And they're like, oh, look at that. I forgot to send it, right? Because that will happen. That's why I like folders. Folders are very easy and clean. All that being said, we are getting close to being ready to export this here. So I'm going to basically go in here and I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to get rid of anything that I'm going to keep these groups, right? Just for routing, because they all go to a vocal main. And what I want to do is print like a vocal reference. And I'm going to delete the name on anything that I don't want. Let's just pretend for speed that I took the time to name the rest of these tracks here. I'm going to call this vocal ref mix. Now, one more important step here before we export anything, I recommend strongly, and like I said, you may want to keep some of your processing on and commit sounds, but you should drop all your faders. You can keep your panning if you want to at Unity, like really. And you can reset your whole mixer if you want, but again, it just depends. Like I said, you might like your room mic sound here, and you might want to send them this pre-processing that you have and just be like, all right, like that's the sound, you know what I mean? Or you might want to just be like, hey, get rid of all this, bypass all of these things, and just totally like reset the mixer. Either way, it's very important to send your faders at Unity, decide what processing you're keeping and not, what panning you're keeping. We're going to remove empty tracks, get rid of anything in the session that doesn't need to be in here. Again, we're not going to use these groups. So, all right. We're gonna basically bounce down all these individual tracks. We're gonna turn off all the inserts on them. Okay, so all that is done. Everything is prepped. You know, I've got the plugins that I want on. I've got the effects, you know, like the vocals going to the right channels and sending the effects in so I can generate the effects and the correct vocal effects I want to the vocal. I've got some basic bus processing on here, the way I like the vocals EQ'd and I want them to sound, right? So I've got all this nonsense on here. And guess what? That's gonna generate the right vocal timbre in the effects returns. And then I will give these to the mixer and the mixer can add their own effects, but at least they know that I like a true verb, I like an H delay, a vocal delay and a vocal reverb effect that I think sound good as a producer and the artist thought sounded good and signed off on the pre-production mix. So let's go here to Cubase. We're gonna batch export all this stuff and take a look. Okay, so now I'm gonna do these groups, remember, because they're consolidating. I'm gonna do the vocal reference mix. I'm not gonna highlight any of these because all of this is irrelevant. I'm gonna do the effects sends. I'm going to do my instrument tracks because that's like the piano and stuff. Then I'm gonna do all the audio tracks. I'm gonna remove the ones that are not correct. I would then go to a file, a folder, and I would dump these into a folder. Now, you might want to be a little bit more tactical, like I said, and do all the things in groups, like all your drums, all of this, all that. I highly recommend it. But for now, just to save time, because I'm getting a bit long-winded, it's a little bit easier for me to just show you how to do it this way. So a lot of different ways you can do this. And hopefully that helps you understand how to prep stuff better for mixing. So hopefully that gives you some good guidelines that will help you understand how to better send stuff off to a mixer and how to commit as a producer. Good luck with that. If you enjoy this type of content, drop me a like, subscribe, and leave me a comment below to let me know if this type of content helped and you want me to make more of it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.